Merriam-Webster defines democracy as a system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I am your host, Robert Stanley. How free do you really want to be? Today, we are discussing democracy.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
Today we are talking with a conservative, Dallas Duff, and a progressive, Phillip Griffin. I really appreciate both of you being back on the show. To find some point of agreement, I think I had to go all the way back to the Enlightenment. Also known as the Age of Reason, it was a philosophical movement that took place primarily in Europe and later in North America during the late 17th and early 18th century. The five primary tenets of liberalism are rationalism, meliorism, autonomous individualism, ethical egalitarianism, and pluralism. I want to go over each one of these five to just kind of see if you guys would at least agree here and then see where we can go from there. Okay, so first one, rationalism. The world can be comprehended via reason. Is that something we can all agree on?
Yeah, I agree on that.
The world can be comprehended
so I'm familiar
via
with those,
reason.
yeah. The underpinning of the... But yeah, let's say yes.
All right. Meliorism, things can be better. That's pretty simple. Could we all agree there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Even with capitalism, Dallas? Can we actually find an economical system that is better than capitalism? Do you think that the future will be capitalist?
I think capitalism could possibly be refined in certain ways, but I'm not sure there's a better system that you could come up with.
So right from the start, you could not say that you agree with the second tenet of liberalism, of the Enlightenment, at least in regards to economics.
Well, I agree that things can get better. Yes, I don't necessarily agree that there are better systems because there could be better systems that I'm not yet aware of.
Okay, well, that's fair.
That I'll give you that.
Yeah. Something you're not aware of that might be better than capitalism itself.
Right. I could say that because obviously I'm not aware of it. So anything could be possible that I'm not aware of. Yes.
Yeah. Well, not anything, because some things might contradict one another that you don't know.
As long as it's not logically contradictory, right?
That was a trick. All right. Autonomous individualism. People have autonomous wills. Would you guys agree with that one?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I actually wouldn't. I don't think we have free will, but this is not about me. This is about you guys.
Well, yeah. I mean, maybe not in our current system. I disagree with her, but
no,
I
don't think so. Like
people,
psychologically speaking.
Yeah.
Well, okay. If you want to get into, I don't want to get too much down the weeds into the free will question, but actually, there's probably some common ground here on this because my view on free will is complex. And I think we could probably both agree that there are degrees of free will that exist, and it gets complicated kind of in certain ways. So I would say we have what I would call kind of micro free will, absolutely. So I'm sitting here, I'm drinking a glass of water. I have the free will. I have numerous choices of things to drink. I can sip this glass of water. I have some juice. There's some peanut butter in the cabinet. I have the free will to choose any number of those, right? Where it gets tricky is when it comes to things you don't.
You would have to know every single reason that you want the peanut butter instead of the orange juice.
Right.
To
well,
make
yeah,
that
that's a fair point. I mean, and I was gonna kind of get into that.
Sorry.
I can't there are certain foods or drinks that I naturally don't like or that I naturally do like that other people have the opposite taste of, right? So I could, say I have the free will to drink a kale smoothie, but I have no desire to drink a kale smoothie. Therefore, a kale smoothie is not within my realm of options that I want to choose from. Whereas other people, it might be within the realm of options. And then you get into the issue of
temptations
and
And I would chime in for applicable to our discussion. I think in a lot of ways you don't have free will because of the quality of outcomes. If you're in a specific socioeconomic situation, you're not going to have the same choices as someone else.
You're like,
like
Bernie Sanders, where like no matter what question he gets asked by the reporter, he's always like,
and the billionaires and millionaires,
1% of the like you always get it right back to that theme. Okay, so either way, autonomous individualism, we seem to agree there. Ethical egalitarianism, equal worth. Everyone has equal worth, no matter who they are. Is that something we could all agree on?
Equal moral worth?
Intrinsic.
Is that the question?
Equal intrinsic value.
Yes.
Even at the border?
Yes.
That was the first thing that popped in there.
Yeah, I would say, in principle, we should strive for those principles. Obviously, I don't think in outcomes that's true, but
do you think Melania Trump has the same intrinsic value as Noam Chomsky?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
because I don't, but
as a human being, yeah. I mean,
I guess as a human being, we have to, these are tenets. They're not necessarily how we feel. They're how we choose to live our life, how we choose to see the world. All right, last one. Pluralism. Society should have multiple views. I don't know where you guys land on this one, because Philip might say we need to quiet down those Nazis, and Dallas might say I don't really like secularism.
So, all right, I'll go ahead. So I think absolutely society should allow multiple views, including secularism, probably including, certain tenets of even, abhorrent things like certain elements of racism. Though I will say this, like society, here's kind of the conservative view in terms of how society kind of should be arranged. So I think within the society, you have to give people certain rights that you can't take away. But in order to maintain a certain ideal of society, you also have to kind of, and this is where the kind of border issue comes into play. Like, I think you have to vet who comes into your society, and I think you should be very careful of the types of views that you allow into your society. You have much less control of people who are already here or are already born into the society. But I think we need to, I think hopefully we can both agree that, if someone has no neo-Nazi views and they aren't currently a citizen and they're trying to become a citizen, that perhaps maybe we should not let that person into our society. So
what about Operation Paperclip? That was NASA pretty much being started by Nazis.
Oh, interesting.
It's fascinating. It's a real thing.
I don't know about that.
That's not just a crazy conspiracy theory. That's a real thing.
Well, I don't know. There's a lot to go with this question, but I guess I would maybe relate it to, maybe how our political discussion is going to go, where the founding fathers had a specific way they thought society should be organized, and who was important and who wasn't. I don't know. I guess the free speech aspect of it. I think you address the causes for somebody being a neo-Nazi versus trying to regulate their belief system. Maybe like white supremacist and want to shoot everybody. I think that solves the problem of having to restrict people's ideologies.
Well, they don't want to shoot everybody. Not their white. Well, not white people.
Well,
okay, check this out. Operation Paperclip, this is Wikipedia, was a secret program of the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, largely carried out by special agents of Army CIC, in which more than 1,600 German scientists, that's a big number, dude, 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians, and this isn't just like German scientists today, right? This is like Nazis, okay? Engineers and technicians such as Werner von Braun. Remember Werner von Braun? That dude?
Yeah, name's not familiar.
Oh, man, okay. And his V-2 rocket team were taken from Germany to America for U.S. government employment, primarily between 1945 and 1959. Many were former members and some were former leaders of the Nazi Party. The primary purpose for Operation Paperclip was U.S. military advantage in the Soviet-American Cold War and the space race. That shit's fucking crazy. Nazis started NASA.
Well, I think back then they were the leaders of technology and everything back in the 20s, right before they collapsed. Weren't they around the 1910s, 20s?
What's that one guy that figured out how to like get the nitrogen out of the air and get it into the soil? The same dude that created the gas that they used in World War I. And then that gas was later used in World War II to kill Jews. Crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Crazy. That guy was insane. All right. I totally derailed the conversation. Gentlemen. But basically, that was our government using our tax dollars and giving it to Nazis when it comes to your government using your money in ways that you might not agree with. Where do you guys fall on publicly funded elections?
Like, I don't think it's a good idea, generally speaking. Like, I think there are way too many problems with this idea, including constitutional ones. But I'm going to approach this conversation as someone who's willing to be convinced that this is a good idea. So while, I'm going to push back on you, I'm open to be convinced that this could work. So first off, I'd like to get kind of your general synopsis of this idea, and then I'd like to ask you kind of some questions.
So publicly funded elections are needed because of the corrupting influence of money in politics. But to really kind of understand that issue, I was thinking I kind of got to sort of go back to the beginning of the founding of the Constitution. And I don't know how laborious to go through, some of these things. But in a nutshell, the founding fathers set the system up to be an oligarchy where, the wealth of the nation, the minority, the opulent, have to be protected against the tyranny of the majority. So you've got this string of thought throughout from the constitutional debates and onward that the mass of people are stupid, uneducated, and they shouldn't have a place in dealing with their own affairs. They're too stupid. We have to protect ourselves from the roar of the bewildering herd. And so intellectuals set it up to where, in the beginning, the Senate wasn't even electable from the population. And then, of course, only men with property could vote or anything. But so you've got these three types of capitalist systems, penny capitalism. You've got, maybe it's called like mercantile capitalism. Then you've got corporate capitalism. And penny capitalism is where, the farm, you're in like a town and the farmer brings his stuff and sells his goods in the market. The next stage would be where you've got like small business, where say somebody owns a small business or maybe a small factory, and they employ like 10, 12 people in the town, and they pay for taxes. They sit on the school board, so they have an interest in what happens in political and social life in that town. And then you've got this corporate capitalism, this totally other beast, where through a series of court cases has gained the rights of people, but then actually even more rights than people. And the history behind that is, the beginning of a corporation was actually to do like a public work project, to build a bridge or something, and they had very specific mandates in their charter, a specific amount of like capitalization that they were given, and they were seen as subordinate to, the citizenry. They were supposed to do something, and they were supposed to disband. But then through the 14th Amendment, they gained the rights of people that were supposed to protect newly freed slaves. So then that takes us to where these corporations have an overwhelming influence on the way life happens. They influence elections, just everything about society. And so you have to get that money, that influence out of the political system that just wreaks havoc with these politicians' ability to do anything that the people actually want.
So I would say I'm a pragmatist first and foremost. Now, while I do have an ideology as well, which you might define as conservatism, I try and make sure that the two don't clash. Like, it's been my general perception that whenever ideology eclipses pragmatism, good solutions are not found. And oftentimes, greater amounts of suffering is actually created as a result. And one thing I think we need to understand about politics is that when you solve one problem, you almost always create another problem. So the main question, I ask, and I think we as a society should be asking, is not does the fact of having lots of money in politics create problems? I actually agree that it creates problems, but my contention is that attempts to solve this problem is going to create more and worse problems, in my opinion, that I'm not willing to accept. And the devil's in the details, right? So let me just kind of throw a few questions out there to you, because I told you going into this conversation, I might be willing to accept your premise if you can kind of frame it in a way. I mean, you don't have to give me every minute detail, but I do have some questions that would seriously determine my views on this. So here's my first question. So how do we determine who qualifies for a presidential candidacy? So should you have to get a certain amount of signatures? Like, how do we go about determining the initial batch of candidates? Will there be a cap on the total number allowed to run? Like, how do we get our candidates? First off, that's my first question.
Sure. Yeah, totally reasonable. Let's just assume. Can we just assume there's a presidential race for this question?
I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, for the sake of this conversation, we'll go with that.
Because it would change with everything. So I haven't looked at specific systems or drawn up a plan, but I think one measure. I mean, what do we want to? The question is like, what do we want to do? We don't want every Yahoo running just to run. They have to have a serious backing behind them from the public. Maybe like the beginnings of an operational team that can do stuff. So one thing would be signatures. The candidate has to, and I don't know what that specific number would be. I'd have to look at, honestly, I'd have to have experts go through this stuff, census experts and, per capita, these, how many people are in this district and stuff like that, which I don't have the knowledge of. But, if I was specifically designing the system, I would have experts and UN people that oversee the credibility of elections and just political scientists and all these experts come and talk about, debate, and figure out what the best plan is. But I think one measure could be how many signatures they get. And using that system, you wouldn't have to put a specific cap on a number of candidates, because if they meet the requirements to be a credible candidate, then they're in. Whereas right now, if you can raise a ton of money, I should say, in fact, you have to be able to raise a ton of money to even get in the race. You have to, what do you got to spend like $1 billion to win the presidency right now, which of course comes with a host of issues with that, but so no cap on the number of candidates, and that doesn't have to be the only measure of a legitimate candidate.
I already see a potential loophole in this process, and I'd be curious how you may address this. So you're talking about getting signatures. What's preventing rich people from paying others to go around getting signatures on their behalf or promoting their candidacy on their behalf?
That's kind of what happens right now, right? You have to pay people to the the duopoly. It's really just a one-party system. Makes it impossible almost for third parties to get in. Because one of the reasons is you have to get all these signatures right now and get on these ballots in these states. And the way you have to do that is pay at least staffers to get signatures. What's to stop people? You're talking about bribing the people that sign it, or the people that are standing on the street corner asking people to sign it?
Yeah, so if I have you right, you're saying the ideal system is so anyone can run for presidency, and we're going to have a certain amount of money that allocates to these candidates. But first, we have to determine how we get these candidates, and you're saying that we determine that by acquiring a certain number of signatures, correct?
Yeah, I think one measure could be how many. If they get a certain number of signatures, that could be one thing that could establish that they're an actual candidate.
What if there was a bill that was passed that said that our tax dollars would go to pay for campaigns in such a way that anybody can run, but that money has to come from the signatures that you're talking about, and then as soon as they get enough from their area, every state could then put the person that has the most signatures forward, and then we would pay for their election campaign as more of a public information system where everybody gets the same kind of information about the same about all the candidates and their policies, their platforms. It would be equal with each candidate, but paid for via our tax dollars. It can't be from any outside party. It can't be from any super PAC. It can't be from any corporations. It just has to be the lump sum that we give you.
Yeah, every candidate gets the same amount of money, no matter, it's not like, I guess I should say, there's a set amount of money we say every candidate gets to run their campaign. And then in addition to that, we can set up other things where every candidate gets so much time on a debate and every candidate gets some sort of public forum that's televised or whatever, some access to media where they get to
and
all have their say.
One. As a contingent for you to receive the public funds for your campaign, you have to sit down with the other candidate live on camera and have a long-form discussion. I'm talking 2 hours and a break, another 2 hours and a break, another 2 hours and a break. Like, you have to just keep hammering away at all the points and let these people discuss their concepts in the marketplace of ideas in such a way that it's not like a Fox News talking head or a pundit from MSNBC trying to get some, a sound bite. It's just the two of you and kind of like a Pangburn philosophy format. Is that something you could get behind, Dallas?
I think it's an interesting idea, but I don't think it solves any of the problems really that I think both of y'all seem to be concerned about. So how do you prevent candidates themselves from funneling money to supporters? Okay, here's the curious question. Should my ability to support a certain candidate be limited in any way beyond simply giving them money directly? So, for example,
yes.
would you, let's say I'm a filmmaker and I want to make a whoever Andrew Yang documentary, and it's going to basically promote his candidacy, and it's going to cost a certain amount of money, and I'm going to need to promote this. I'm going to need to spend money on advertising. Should I be allowed to do that? Should I be capped in some way?
Yeah,
what's preventing that Andrew Yang himself or people around him from funneling money to me as a supporter? So how do you prevent that? Let's say I'm a candidate, and I give a friend $100,000 for consulting services, and let's say my friend then gives their friend $80,000 for services, and then that friend uses the money to promote my candidacy. I'm not sure you're aware of the can of worms that you're opening up and how basically impossible it would be to monitor and control the flow of money. That's at least my perception, or my initial thoughts on that. Your reaction?
The IRS is really good at keeping a watch on 501c3s. For that very reason that you're bringing up. So, this is something that we already have Department of the Government in place that does this sort of thing.
Yeah, but you would have
dark money. Yeah,
you would have to pass. You would have to definitely pass a bunch more laws, and definitely some laws that would prevent a lot of free exchanges of money, not just kind of in direct quid pro quo types of ways. But like I said, it would be, like I said, if it's in very indirect ways, kind of through second, third, and fourth parties, like that. That becomes very grayer and grayer and grayer, and then the government becomes more and more authoritarian in terms of kind of how they control the flow of money. Yes. I don't see a practical way of really controlling what y'all want to control.
Well, I would say the mitigating force of money is going to dissipate as we have public forums and the candidates are given a appropriate amount of money that they need to spend to have, say if they want to travel around the country, and they're going to get appropriate amount of forums to discuss their political ideas. And so, yeah, sure, you might have the Koch brothers try and spend money for, I don't know, some documentary, I guess, right? But I think even if that happens, you've got enough people informed.
Let's say I, as an individual, want to support a certain candidate by taking out ads on wherever. It could be anywhere, like the paper, TV, and anywhere. Like, should I, as a citizen, be allowed to kind of engage in the market of kind of advertising in this regard?
Yeah, advertising can be an interesting question. I don't know. What do you think? You think you should be able to I don't know, write opinion pieces, pay for opinion pieces in the New York Times, or I don't know what else what else you're thinking of that would really influence people with.
Yeah, I mean, like taking out like just ads in a newspaper, or maybe a billboard. Like, it could be anything. Just people's ability to, kind of spend money freely in kind of the advertising marketplace. Like, do you believe that should be capped? And that should be people's ability should be handcuffed as it relates to supporting political candidates.
I mean, my initial thoughts are no. I mean, if somebody wants to write a book, or pay for, I think the mitigating force would be we really give these candidates enough exposure and time to discuss their issues that where somebody can't swift vote them. They can't, put out all this misinformation because they're funded by the Koch brothers, and that's going to have an overwhelming influence.
But aren't the Koch brothers or whoever it might be, aren't they going to find ways of supporting their political candidates in financial ways anyways? Like, I feel like, with all due respect, like, I feel like your view is slightly naive. Like, I think people are going to find ways around it. And I think I've presented a few kind of clear, issues with that in terms of where the issues might lie. Like, people want to spend money on things, and they're going to find ways to do it. And, I just haven't heard a clear enough kind of way of preventing people from doing that.
Look at what we have now. I mean, it's chaos. So if you're worried about the Koch brothers' influence under this new system that we have, where whatever ways they find, we can either address, or they're just going to be so small in comparison, then obviously we'd move to that system first, or a better system from this one, right? I mean, the influence they have now, where they've just bought the Republican Party, would pale in comparison, or the the new system would pale in comparison to that. So that'd be a plus. That'd be a good thing if we move to this new system.
Let me throw this out there. We were talking about how government should use our money. I want to go all the way back to FDR. We started off with the Enlightenment. Let's move forward a little bit. We're talking 1933, the New Deal. Whenever the sitting president says we're going to go and attack another country, and then follows that up with, we need to rebuild that country, Philip would take a lot of objection to saying, let's let Raytheon do it, right? When Raytheon's the person that tried to get us into the war in the first place, right, via lobbying. So in the same sense, Dallas might say, hey, AOC's Green New Deal is probably not the best way to spend my money. I worked for that money. I don't want my tax dollars spent that way. And it seems like a lot of the disagreement that you guys might have is exactly how our government spends our money. 1933 had, and prepare yourself, this is a big list of government programs: Emergency Baking Relief Act, Economy Act, Beer Wine Revenue Act, Civilian Conservation Corps, Federal Emergency Relief Act, Agricultural Adjustment Act, Tennessee Valley Authority Act, National Employment System Act, Homeowners Loan Act. Where'd that one go? National Industrial Recovery Act, Public Works Administration, Glass-Steagall Act. We totally blew that one. Civil Works Administration, Gold Reserve Act, Securities and Exchange Act, Indian Reorganization Act, National Housing Act, Federal Farm Bankruptcy Act. The second New Deal, 35, came out with Emergency Relief Appropriation Act, Works Progress Administration, Resettlement Administration, Rural Electrification Administration, National Labor Relations Act, Social Security Act, Banking Act, Revenue Act. By the way, the Banking Act is what got you those little gold placards that you always see at your bank. Soil Conservation and Domestic Allotment, Bankhead Jones Farm Tenant Act, Judicial Procedure Reform Bill, Housing Act, Farm Security, Federal Crop Insurance Corporation. They keep going. Here's another one. How about the Fair Labor Standards Act? Jesus Christ, where'd that one go? So that there were many more. Okay, I'm not gonna bore you guys with these. This is what happened, and this is what saved our country during the Great Depression. Okay, this is a historical fact. You can argue, well, the war helped us out. I don't know where Dallas would land on that one, but I'm just saying, like, sometimes government works, right? And my question to you guys is, right now in our current politics, we're talking about free college and free education. And Dallas would line up and probably say something like, hey, I don't want my tax dollars spent that way, where Phillip would probably be for that. But I'm sure Phillip is against a lot of the stuff that Trump is doing right now. So I want to ask you guys, where do you line up with free college, free education?
So I think we have to go back to what were the reasons we got that deal, right? It was because inequality was astronomical, and it wasn't even his idea, actually. That was a third party that forced that on him, and he said it privately in a letter, I think, to his brother. He said, "Hey, concentrated capital. Hey, you guys, we better give them some of our money, or this whole system's going down." So he bragged about saving capitalism because, inequality is the same as it was in the 30s now, and the system's about to go down. So you needed those types of reforms to get a healthy middle class. And with a healthy middle class, that's 70% of the economy. When you have the rich with all this money, they don't spend it on social programs. They invest in hedge funds. They don't invest in schools and all this stuff. I think policies and programs that benefit the majority of ordinary people are a good thing. Yeah, I think a minimum wage. I think a 40-hour work week. All that kind of stuff. And then what Nader came along afterwards too, with that democratizing force, and got if you rattle off the list of programs that Nader got pushed through, it's the same kind of thing. It's all for the ordinary person.
Dallas, Phil says he's all for this stuff. Let me ask you this. If you were a conservative during FDR's time, you would have been against the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression. Would you say that a conservative then was wrong, but a conservative now is right?
Well, first off, I would encourage people to go and listen to some of the conservative arguments against what you're saying, because and I'm not going to get too much into the details of it because I'm not an economist. I'm not really into the nitty-gritty details of FDR policies and all the economic effects and all that. But I will say, I think people who are listening, go check out people like Thomas Sowell, hear what people like him are saying about this issue, because there are conservative economists that would reject this idea that FDR policies got us out of the Great Depression. They would argue that they actually prolonged the Depression. And like I said, I'm not going to get into the details of that because I'm not even that educated on the details of it. But let me just say one more thing in this segment. I think, I'm going to sum up my entire view of politics in 2 really short sentences. You ready? I believe the government should be relegated only to a limited necessity, and I believe more liberty is better than less liberty once the basic necessity of government has been met. That's kind of the general conservative view. It's not no government, it's about limited government and limiting government to its necessity. And maybe there will be disagreements about what that necessity is, but that is at least the philosophical principle of conservatism, at least in kind of the American sense in the modern era.
Well, what do you think about some of those specific programs, though, like free public education, a 40-hour work week, minimum wage? Because that's all not really limited government. That's the government imposing these kind of regulations on capitalism. I mean, are you for those types of programs?
You named 3 or 4 things. Can you name them in order again?
Say a 40-hour work week. I think I know you're for disability, a minimum wage.
Let's start with that one, Phil. Let's start with that one. Dallas, can you at least get behind minimum wage?
No, and there's the general conservative economic view, and which I think is the kind of rational, pragmatic view that as again, not being an economist, but just as kind of a rationalist, it's quite clear to me that when it comes to the issue of the minimum wage, that when the government artificially raises wages, that's going to create a reaction in the marketplace, right? So what the marketplace is going to do is, so the government's going to raise wages to, let's go say it's $7 an hour minimum wage. They bring it up to 15. Okay, so they've artificially brought up wages. So what's going to be the reaction of that? So the reaction of that is going to be that so first off, the guy that was making $7 an hour is going to make $15 an hour, but then everyone's wages is going to have to go up in recession, right? Because now the guy that was making $15 an hour now has to make, $20-something an hour, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a business, so think about, this is the question that I would really hammer down and I would challenge people on the left about, is that people, when you have a business, your goal is, you have a certain kind of profit goal that like you want to achieve, like at least in terms of margins, and you want to see kind of profits go up continually. But if the government raises wages in a way that's going to cut into kind of the profit margins that you want, well, you have to find, as a business, you have to find a way to maintain the profit margins that you want, right? So how do you do that? You either fire people, generally speaking, or you end up raising the prices of your goods or services. That's the general kind of action reaction. And then also it creates inflation of the currency. So now, we've artificially inflated currency. So we're just injecting more currency into the marketplace.
So I got to agree with Dallas on this one. Even though I am pro minimum wage, and it hasn't been raised in over a decade, by the way, I am opposed to that. But he's not necessarily wrong when he says that increasing minimum wage also has an adverse effect of increasing unemployment. Every economics professor at every college in America will tell you that. So, I mean, that's a real consequence that we have to recognize. So,
yeah, I could push back a little bit on that. I don't have the specific studies in front of me that say what, my understanding is it's sort of a wash for the boosting or subtracting from the economy. But what it does do is give a life-saving wage to those people at the entry level when all is said and done. Those people that instead of getting paid 1 cent an hour. I mean, you look at the circumstances of one of the built-in what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Contradictions of capitalism is where now that we have this globalization and you have to compete against a sweatshop worker in China making 5 cents an hour, is that they will pay as low as they can. And as soon as those people start getting together and trying to get more wages, they leave and go to another India or somewhere else, right? And take advantage of those people. So to think that if they didn't have some minimum protections built in, like a minimum wage, wouldn't benefit them, I think is maybe not true. I think that maybe we can pick an easier example that doesn't require an economics degree, like say child labor. That you can't have child labor anymore. By the way, the labor struggle in America was one of the most brutalist struggles in any country. But I think these minimum protections do keep people from starving. But I do take your point that the system of corporate capitalism needs serious safety mechanisms built in. Otherwise, look at these corporations that are charging $200 for something that costs 5 cents to make in a sweatshop. Look at, like you said, with the minimum wage, if you look at production since the 70s has gone up 77%, but then minimum wages have only gone up, say, like 12%. And if the minimum wage was tied to profits and productivity, it would be over $20 an hour. So we have a system that has gotten rid of all the controls and mechanisms that once allowed piecemeal reforms to take place, to where now all the profits are going to higher and higher concentrated capital, which buys politicians, that gets more laws, tax laws and deregulation, all kinds of other stuff, corporate governance rules that allows them to get more money, that allows them to buy more politicians, that allows them to get more. And we see the worst inequality since the 1930s because we've let this corporate capitalism system run out of control. But so maybe you didn't like minimum wage. You don't think we should have a minimum wage, which I think corporations would totally exploit and start paying people $5 an hour, $4 an hour, right? And I don't think goods would go down because, like you said, a corporation is a fictionary entity it's a legal fiction, and it's a sociopathic tyranny its only mission is to make profit over all other factors, common good. So they'll poison people, harm people, lay people off. They'll go to other countries and desolate the town that they're in. They'll do anything to make money. And if that means suppress, in fact, they're supposed to by law take care of the shareholders. So if they make a decision that's not in that interest, that CEO is fired. So I don't know. I mean, structuring our society around a oppressive tyranny that has almost no oversight, that has such a huge role. I mean, the major decisions over what happens in the society, decisions over investment, production, distribution, they're in the hands of a relatively concentrated network of major corporations and conglomerates and investment firms. They staff the major executive positions in government. They're the ones who own the media. They have an overwhelmingly dominant role in the way life happens within the economic system, and by law and in principle, they dominate.
Dallas, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, just on kind of the general money questions, I have a curious question I'd like to ask Phillip. Who spends and allocates money more efficiently? Like in the individuals who earn the money or the government? And it doesn't even necessarily have to be the government. We could just say, any kind of third party that's kind of in control of, money. Does the question make sense?
Well, I think so. I have to take some liberties in what you mean. But if we're talking about for the common good, is that what we're talking about?
No, I mean efficiency. In terms of economic efficiency.
What's good for the economy?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I would say there's a lot of pieces to that, and I guess I would need the context. But let me say this. So consumer spending is 70% of the economy. The middle class is the heart of that spending. The middle class is what keeps the economy going. A rich person making $10 million a year doesn't spend $10 million a year. They save it. So if you cut taxes for them, they don't take those savings and invest in the economy, buy more service and goods, which creates all this kind of stuff. They put it into a hedge fund and then financial instruments, and then they make returns on those instruments. So in the context of that kind of who spends more efficiently that's better for the economy, well, the middle class does, not the 1%.
But Phil, if I can interrupt you, buddy, he's asking you who's having a higher success rate, the government or capitalist free market industries?
Well, doing good by what metric? I mean, ideally, the benefit of government-run programs is they can actually operate at a loss. They can where a corporation has to make even a profit. But if it's for the common good, then maybe we want the fire department to put out fires, and it's okay if they don't make a profit, if they make a loss. So I don't know, kind of maybe that needs to be explained.
Dallas, are you concerned with the good of the people, or is your question simply limited to some random entity building more profit for itself?
So I think this kind of goes back to what I had said earlier about kind of pragmatism versus ideology, because I believe, both. I think it's empirically true that when you maximize free choices amongst individuals in society in terms of how to spend the money that they have kind of freely exchanged for somebody's has a job and they're offering a job and they pay you for the job, and you earn, a certain amount of money, right? So I believe that, it's a pragmatic issue. And, I thought what Phillip said something that kind of, it sort of like blew my mind a little bit. I mean, I get what he was saying. And he said that, that government doesn't have to operate on profit motives, and that can be a positive. I think that's mostly a negative, because things cost money. Now, I agree that we need things like the fire department, and that also goes back to a previous point I made about limiting government to its minimal necessity. I believe it is a necessity for the fire department and the police department and things like that to exist.
Okay. Let me rephrase. Okay, so we've got NASA to bring it full circle back to the Nazis, right? And they are not really good at spending money wisely. I mean, they only get 1% of your dollar, and they're doing great stuff with it. But how they use that 1%, it could be used more efficiently whenever you factor in someone like SpaceX, for example, right? Elon Musk is doing all sorts of stuff from the private industry, and that works better, right? But without the opportunity for profit, there would be no space exploration. So whenever SpaceX comes along, they say, hey, we can make profit here, right? But without the opportunity for profit, there's no reason. So if NASA didn't exist, SpaceX wouldn't exist. But SpaceX is better at getting rockets into space and bringing them back. in the same sense of, if there's no reason to put roads in a social economically poor area, private corporations simply wouldn't do it. They wouldn't have roads, right? They'd be horse and buggying their way through a cornfield to get to work. That's not really fair to them. So in some ways, the government steps in and helps out and creates some kind of form of egalitarianism whenever it's not profit-based. But profit-based things like diamonds, for instance, a big screen television, the latest pair of Jordans. It's really good at marketing and selling and getting that product out there. That's why we've got 300 different kinds of shoes, right? But everybody's pretty much drinking the same water from your tap because there's not a lot of profit in water unless you bottle it and take it from its source and then resell it. But if you want to get water to everybody equally, you need the government. So that, I think that's kind of what Phillip is asking here, is he's saying, which way is the best way to spend that money? And whenever you challenge him and say, who's better at this? And he says, well, I can't really say the government's better with the money. I kind of want to rebuttal by saying, what about areas where profit isn't the incentive? Phillip is asking, are you concerned about quality of life?
Because the government is inefficient at spending money, then that is one of the reasons why I think it should be limited to its minimal necessity. Like, you know, there is a minimal necessity, or at least I believe there is a minimal necessity. And I think one of those minimal necessities is public roads and firemen and policemen. Now, do I think NASA meets the minimal necessity? That would be an interesting question that I haven't put that much thought into. So I'll be agnostic on that question for now, and maybe that could be explored at a later time. But yes, but to sum it all up, because the government is inefficient at spending money, it should be limited in the amount of money that we give it to spend.
Well, when you get to the federal government, we've been sold a line, for 50 years of intense corporate propaganda that the government is the enemy. There cannot be a government that's buying for the people. Well, in practice, this description is not inaccurate. The government is to a large extent the enemy, but the reason is that it's so largely under control of private tyrannies that are excluded from sort of off in the corner somewhere, you're not supposed to see them. But the reason for anti-government propaganda is obvious enough. The purpose is to remove decision-making from the public arena, where the public does, in principle, and sometimes even in practice, have ways to participate in it and take part in it, and shift it over to the private arena where it is totally out of control.
Thank you guys so much for talking to us today. I really enjoyed hearing both your perspectives. We started off with the 5 tenets of liberalism, and one of those being maybe the most important one. Pluralism. Society should have multiple views. Would you at least admit that you both should be allowed into the marketplace of ideas, that your different views have value even though you disagree?
Well, my problem with it is I think he's been fed 50 years of intense corporate propaganda. I think we have...
And I think he's been fed a bunch of propaganda, blah, blah, blah. Like, let's not go down that road.
Robert, are you familiar with manufacturing consent?
Oh, yeah, I love it. The book and the documentary.
I think we don't have a functioning media system that informs people. We didn't even get to talk about the Powell Memorandum, the enormous pushback on the democratizing force of the 60s that went after everything, the workplace, institutions, schools, all this stuff of intense corporate propaganda, where they said there's this excess of democracy. They said these people are participating too much. We can't have this. The system can't take this. We need to organize business interests and push back hard. We can't have these guys running their own affairs. This is the bewildered herd. So I think his politics are, I think his heart's in the right place, but his information is skewed.
Boom,
because
right there.
I think your information is skewed, buddy.
No.
Yeah, well,
I think
that's
Phil,
not ad hominem.
Phil, I think you touched in on it.
But
you said his heart is in the right place. Would you say that Dallas actually has good intentions? He's just being tricked by the powers that be. In Dallas, would you say Phil has good intentions, but he's being tricked by the powers that be? Could we at least end on that point of agreement? We started with agreement of liberalism itself. Classical liberalism, not necessarily like liberal versus conservative, but we all knew what I was talking about. I don't want to get into semantics, but could you guys at least end on the point of saying you're a good fucking person, you're just gullible? Can we agree there?
Well, I don't even think he's gullible. I think it's just very effective propaganda that started from elementary school and everything. But yeah, I would think, to your point, I think he's a smart guy, and I think his heart's in the right place.
Dallas, would you at least give him that you think that his heart's in the right place, that liberals might not be the fucking demogorgon?
Yeah, like I think Phillip is smart, and I think he's definitely well read. I think in my opinion, where he falls short is I don't think he has enough of a pragmatic view of these things. I don't think he reasons through them well enough, in my opinion. I think they're based more on ideology than they are basically just based upon reasoning through the positions. That's my opinion. That's my view.
Wait. Okay, so what if it is me as trying to be an objective observer, even though I tend to lean more Phillip style than Dallas style, right? But just trying to be objective here, would it be fair to say that neither of you think the other person is like morally flawed intrinsically, but Phillip, you think Dallas has been tricked, and Dallas, you think Phillip is not necessarily reasonable? Would that be a fair characterization of your relationship?
I don't like that, that frame, like he's been tricked, like he's duped. But I think that the intense corporate propaganda has been effective. I think concentrations of power.
You're saying the same thing, man.
Well, yeah, okay, but it has
Dallas,
pejorative
do you feel like he's talking to you like as if you've been duped? Well, let's put the cards on the table, man. He's saying that the corporations have fooled you.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a condescending thing, because I think
so, but I don't think he's wrong. But I do think it's condescending. It's a hard fucking pill to
condescending? Yeah, I don't know. Okay,
it is.
I mean, if you're not exposed to the right sources and information, then you're already caught up in these, as Matt Taibbi calls them, these demographic silos, where you're sold this packaged anger, and you're supposed to be angry at one group. We agree, as Nader points out, on 70%. The country agrees on a majority of these issues. But since we have one party, the business party, with two factions called Democrats and Republicans, you don't hear these kind of things. They try and argue over wedge issues, abortion, and all this stuff that the real issues are kept on the margins by the public relations industry that was created, if you're familiar with the Creel Commission, that tried to get us into World War I, and it was effective. You read these guys like Walter Lippmann, engineering consent, manufacturing consent. That's where that comes from. This giant public relations.
But Phil, in the same sense, you don't have the same, like in the same way that you're saying that he is not able to see through bullshit of the corporate propagandists. He's telling you that you are unable to reason. So I mean, in this moment, yes. Like you guys are not. You're not disrespectful people. You're very polite guys. That's why I love having you on. You form your arguments well, and you're very kind to your interlocutors. But you really do have not necessarily like an ethically biased opinion of the other person. You have an intellectually biased opinion of the other person.
Well, yeah, it's the same way that Trump scapegoats poor people and people with no power. He says, hey, these, what Trump does effectively is he points out and says, hey, this is fucked up. Half the country is poor or near poor. We have the worst inequality since the 1930s. So he addresses that, but then he does a little switch and bait. He says, hey, I'm a populist billionaire and I care for you. And I'm gonna take care of all these illegals coming over, these Muslims, anything that's the real issue, right? Which is concentrated corporations. These guys are the bad guys. These guys coming over. He doesn't talk about any of the antecedents for dictators. We support NAFTA trade agreements that makes these guys come over. I mean, it's ridiculous. But yeah, I think he's bought into the scapegoats versus what the real problem is. But I don't think that's because of a lack of intelligence. But yeah.
And what is the real problem?
Concentrated power. These guys that said the public shouldn't do anything in these affairs. There's this excess of democracy. We don't want these people running affairs. Madison and Aristotle came to the same conclusions. They said, if you have massive inequality, democracy cannot coexist with it, because the poor people would simply just vote to get their shit. So there's two solutions to that. Aristotle, in his book Politics, said, let's institute welfare-like reforms. Let's reduce inequality. Madison had the other take. He said, let's reduce democracy. And that's what we did. We reduced democracy. And along with that, you've got concentrated capital, and that's the problem. We've got a plutocracy. Study after study shows that the public at large, 70% of the bottom has no effect, no measurable effect on policy outcomes. Who does? Those at the top. At the top, they literally write the legislation. But from 70%, as you move up, you start to see a little bit of influence on what they want and what public policy ends up being. And when you get to the top, those are the guys who literally write the legislation. So we don't have a democracy. Yeah, it's a republic, but we're supposed to have a democratic republic. We don't have one. We have an oligarchic one, a plutocracy to be exact, where moneyed interests control what happens in society. That's the problem. And we're not going to fix that problem by stopping poor people coming over to get exploited by picking fruit for 12 hours a day in heavy pesticide fields where we deregulate these companies where they don't have to pay damages when someone gets cancer.
All right. So let's end on cancer. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you guys coming on and talking to us today and sharing your opinions. Before I go, I just wanted to give you a chance to make your final arguments, and please make them quickly.
I think it all comes down to, as a society, how do we want to structure our society economically and politically? Capitalism didn't deliver on its promise to give us liberty, equality, and fraternity. And there's nothing that says we as a people should structure our society under these unaccountable, tyrannical, sociopathic corporate entities and the system of corporate capitalism.
So at least half, if not more than half, of our discussion kind of centered around, money in one way or another, whether we're talking about money in politics or economics in general. So I just kind of want to give my view on kind of our two positions and kind of the differences as far as I see them in my biased way. So here's the difference in our two positions as I see it. You don't actually want to get money out of politics because you want a large welfare state. You want you want the government to acquire lots of money to delve out in lots of different ways. You're actually for giving the government lots of power and money, which will be achieved through the taxes, etc. So essentially, you're not for getting money out of politics. What you are for is minimizing the consensual giving of money and maximizing the non-consensual taking of money. Whereas my position, as far as I see it, is not that I want lots of money in politics, but simply that there's no good way to prevent free individuals from freely giving their money to politicians in which they support, nor should we limit people's freedom to freely exchange money. Both of our positions involve lots of money in the hands of politicians. However, my position maximizes consent and maximizes freedom, while yours minimizes consent and also minimizes freedom.
Thank you to Dallas and Phillip. Thank you to Dave Blair at davefreesong.com/free music. Thank you to our patrons. You can also support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, I'll discuss politics and theology with a liberal Christian, Thomas Horrocks. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason. Resettlement Administration, rural, the rural juror. I don't know if you guys follow.
That was a 30 Rock reference,
30
right?
Rock, yeah, not Parks and Rec, 30 Rock, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Let me try that word again. Rural Electrification Administration.
Yeah, I think based upon my back and forth I've had with him so far, I think he's well read.
Start over. I'm sorry, man. Somebody's pouring out an old
that was me.
An old Greek vase of water or oil or something.
Damn it.
Okay, let me, and before I kind of just rattle off my own thoughts on this, Phillip, it sounds like you're saying.
You did not answer the question, for the record.
Do what?
Just saying, you didn't answer the question. But
what was the question?
Okay. Let me. I'm just saying, do you think that Dallas's views should be entertained?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, that's why I'm on a podcast discussing it with him. I don't think they have any merit. I mean, I think when you look at them,
You made my question sound dumb, Phil.
well,
Was
shit.
that a bad segue?
It's probably a good one. I'm just probably fucking it up.
It was just a chance for both of you to kiss each other's ass for a second and end on a
Oh,
positive note.
damn it.
I was just trying to go with like a positive closing. Where
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah, okay,
I mean,
okay,
I disagree with you, but I think you're great. But I'm not trying to tell you what to say. We can go a different route if you want. How do you?
Well, I just, yeah.
What do you think, Dal? That's your nickname. do you like the closing idea, or do you want to go differently? Phil is not picking up what I'm putting down.
What am I responding to?
I'm just asking if you guys. God damn it, you motherfuckers! I'm just asking if you agree with each other.
Are we talking about Nazis
I'm not asking
again?
if you agree. I'm just asking if like you at least appreciate that the other person has opposing views, because we all have lots of stuff. You got to throw a whole bunch of crazy shit in the mix. Maybe you like to wrap yourself in fucking plastic before you fuck. Who knows? I don't know. You have to tear it to get to like the sweet stuff, and and whenever you're fucking, it makes like a little wicky kind of sound. It's a fun thing to do. I'm really into it, and I didn't want to share that.